So this might look like quite a familiar view, but in fact everything's changed. I'm now running prepared P3D version 4.2, and that was quite an upheaval. Just coming up for a year since I upgraded this PC, and of course P3D was just going 64-bit around then, and although I was running primarily, well, exclusively FSX at the time, I did want to make my PC compatible with, or in fact capable of running, the 64-bit apps. Initially X-Plane 11, and I have been successfully running X-Plane 11. But the one drag factor that has held me back is that when I upgraded this PC I put in 32 gigabytes of RAM and then discovered that my Windows installation wasn't going to be able to use that. I had Windows 7 Home Premium, which can only use a maximum of 16 gigabytes. So I've been kind of handicapped since then. Now I was resigned therefore to having to upgrade my operating system, but that was going to mean a bare metal complete reinstall of everything, and you know, that's a big prospect. So I've kind of put that off until now. So I've done that now. You know, it's worse than it sounds in some sense, because it isn't just a reinstall or a fresh install of the flight sim. So going to prepared, 64-bit version of prepared has meant upgrading pretty much everything, every piece of software in the loop. So that includes, let me get my crib sheet so I don't miss anything out. I had to install the operating system. I've gone for Windows 7 Pro, which can address, well, it can certainly address 32 gigabytes, so that's all I'm bothered about at the moment. And I did manage to get an OEM version of that to install, which surprised me, but it turned out to be cost effective. That only cost me about £15 on eBay, and it's, to all intents and purposes, appears to be a legal way of acquiring the operating system. I had to buy P3D, of course, install that, but you know, the hidden sort of cost of upgrading is I had to upgrade to a new version of FSU IPC, a new version of Linda to sit on top of that. I installed a new version of Track IR. Weather-wise, I've needed to upgrade my Active Sky to the P3D version. Of course, Active Sky relies on Rex textures or other textures, so I've had to upgrade my Rex Texture Direct to the P3D version 4 version. What else? EasyCA version 2, which I use, well, for two things, but one thing in particular. It obviously gives me the cockpit effects and the ability to create custom cameras. I don't really use that, but the specific function I wanted was to be able to adjust the seat height and position, in fact, on the fly, and the only way I could really do that was with EasyCA 2, so I've gone for that. That's about all I can think of. I've probably missed a couple of things out there. The Orbix software is, well, I mean, nominally it's the same software with a different installer, so that's probably the only thing that hasn't in a sense changed in the loop. I've currently just installed the Pacific Northwest region and a couple of airports, Orcas Island and Israel's Farm, just for test purposes. The one thing that's missing at the moment is the GPS, the Reality XP GPS. That the existing version of that just isn't compatible with P3D, which is a drag. So for now I'm using the built-in GPS, but that, for reasons I've gone into in the past in my cockpit build videos, that's not suitable to run on the external monitor for the GPS in my cockpit. So I probably will upgrade to the newer version of the RXP GNS 530, and there are some benefits to that. I understand it now has, it still can be keyboard controlled, which is the way I've plumbed it into my cockpit using Linda, but it has a new feature which is that it can respond, it can be made to respond to the FSX and P3D built-in GPS commands, which is much cleaner, a much cleaner way of controlling the GPS. The other thing is it now gives you officially the bezel-free version of the gauge, 2D gauge, so that makes it easier to run on the 2D monitor. But I haven't bought that yet. That's a gap for now. Now I've got this up and running, and it has been quite a relief. I expected to have more problems than I've had. I've had some problems, as you'd expect, but by and large the thing runs pretty much well, and the performance seems to be okay. I'm running 3 separate displays using the view groups feature of P3D, which I'm going to cover. I'll cover the view setup in a separate video, because that's something that's going to be generally of interest, I think. But for now, all you need to know is I'm running it using kind of in the manner of X-Plane 11. If you've watched how I've set that up, I've got my 3 screens without the distortion that you'd see running a NVIDIA Surround, and the performance hit doesn't seem to be, well, I don't know, I mean I haven't compared it with the Surround version, but the performance at the moment is adequate. Now, just something else I'll say while we're here, if you've watched my videos in the past, you do know that things don't remain static in my cockpit, and in fact everything I did in the last video about pretty much about the installation of the Virtual Fly TQ6 quadrant has been undone. I've put everything back the way it was, so that means the fuel panel is back where it was, the elevator trim wheel and the lower panels are back where they were, the fuel panel's back over there, and the TQ6 quad is now mounted back up there where the Cytec quads used to be. And I've mounted that upside down, so the levers are back to front as I discussed previously, and the reason for that is you never really know how this is going to pan out until you change things around and try it out. You know, that moving of the moving around of those panels seemed logically sound until I actually sat down and tried to fly with it, and then the main thing, I suppose in one sense it demonstrates the soundness of the original design and layout of the cockpit that I evolved over time. But in another way, the main thing that really undermined that was the rotary controls that are on the front panel here are generally within my line of sight when they're here and I'm flying, which means that to reach for them and fiddle with the heading bug, for example, or the OBS, my head doesn't really have to make much movement, it's just an eye movement. And of course moving them down to the horizontal position meant I had to move my head down to glance at that panel, and if you remember that I'm using track IR, that sends the track IR, pans the view down, and that's very distracting. But I mean, that head movement away from the screen is also distracting, you know, in a bigger sense than you might have predicted. You know, there's a certain loss of continuity just by having to glance away. You know, if you think that in real life these bugs are generally not only within your line of sight, but they're actually on the instruments that you're trying to adjust. So so we've got a bit of a kind of compromise setup, you know, in a cockpit like this. But anyway, that's it. Long story short, everything's back how it was. The quad up here is so far very usable. I kind of like that. So there we are. That's the only other thing I have to report, I think, for now. In some future videos we'll do some more tinkering with the setup, no doubt. But up shortly after this video is going to be something on the setup of the view, you know, including things like the zoom setting, how to set up the view groups and so on. So look out for that.